Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. And my guest for this bonus Friday episode is Anna Maguire, whom you might have seen as an actor in everything from Saving Private Ryan and Ever After to Dim the Fluorescents, Sundowners, and Violation, among others. She's also a very accomplished filmmaker in her own right, having directed a number of short films, including an exquisite adaptation of Dave Eggers' short story, Your Mother and I. And Anna stars opposite Hamza Haq in Kim Albright's oddball romance With Love and a Major Organ, which is opening in theaters across Canada today. You should check it out. Anna chose another oddball romance, Harold and Maude, Hal Ashby's dark 1971 comedy about a pair of misfits, a morbid son of privilege, played by Bud Cort, and a freewheeling senior citizen, played by Ruth Gordon, who find one another in the chaos of Vietnam-era San Francisco and manage to bring out even more chaos in each other. If you haven't seen Harold and Maude, you should hit pause right now and catch up to it. And if you have seen it, I won't keep you waiting any longer. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Whenever anyone asks me sort of what my favorite film is or what I literally, my mind goes complete tumbleweed. I'm like, film? I've never seen a film. What is film? And so I was like, come on, Anna. And yet Harold and Maude was actually the first one that came to mind because it's a film I've seen many times at many different points in my life. And I've always loved it. I feel like it was the first time I saw it, I didn't even know what to expect. I think my mum was probably like, oh, you should watch this film. And I remember, one of those, I probably watched it as a teenager, like, I don't want to watch an old film, Mum. And then sort of watched it and was just, I think I fell in love with it. Because I also, as a kid, was obsessed with Cat Stevens or Yusuf and I just the sound. Actually, I was on a flight over from Montreal because I was just shooting something there this morning, and I just was like, had the don't be shy, just let your feelings roll on by. Just like it's been in my head now since I rewatched it, just nonstop. So I love it. Just there's something about the soundtrack and the sort of contrast with the content and the story and the sort of darkness and the light that just feels really, I guess, honest and messy and strange and all these things that I really connects with the kind of work that I like to make and I like to watch. And yeah,
rewatching it this time, and it's been, I'm guessing, about 10 years since I've actually revisited it, maybe since the Criterion edition first came out. It's so much more chaotic than I remember. Like in my head, it followed the Cat Stevens themes. Like it doesn't really rock. It's very gentle. It's folky, and what he was doing musically is now like so clearly a counterpoint to what's going on because Harold is a mess. I mean, this is not a surprise to me. This hasn't been a revelation, but the idea that Harold is completely at sea, and I don't think this is the weirdest part. I don't think I'd ever really seen the connection to current events. Like the fact that America is
a very political film. It's
right.
A very political film. And I find that really interesting and complex and moving and it wears its heart on its sleeve, but it also wears its brain on its sleeve. And I think that's amazing.
I think the thing that
film in the 70s that's really sort of
apolitical,
about the Vietnam War and stuff. It's pretty, amazing.
Yeah, and I think that was it. His uncle, his military uncle, is drawn as such a caricature that I don't think I ever really connected it to the idea of active duty. That's what he's talking about, right? Like, I'm going to send you to the front, but it sounds like he's imagining things. It sounds like he's inventing this version of military service that will make Harold the person he needs to be, the person that his family thinks he needs to be. But the way Bud Cort plays it with this sort of beguiling impatience, like he's being polite and sitting through all of this, but he's not going to do anything that this guy wants, and is in fact going to do everything he can to thwart his entire generational plan. Like whatever the structure has been put in place for him before he was born, he's not going to do it. But it didn't hit me until this time that there actually is, and it's, I guess part of it too is because Harold self-destructs his military career so spectacularly that there's no chance that he's going to go to war. But
by kind of leaning into sadism. which is
Exactly.
an amazing moment where he goes, and when his mother's like, finally you're gonna go to military school, and he and Maud concoct a plan where he is like, oh gee whiz, I get to go to war, like, gets really sort of excited about it, and sort of is like, so I get to kill people, I get to get a shrunken head, and you're like, this is so it's so satirical. It's so smart because it's this satire of he's satirizing his uncle, I guess, on and pushing that. But not only his uncle, he's satirizing the American government. He's satirizing warmongers, and the film is really about love. And I guess that sort of comes back to what you're saying about the Cat Stevens soundtrack, and that it is this kind of I really was obsessed with all of his albums as a kid. I'd sort of listened to, I had a CD and listened to the best of Cat Stevens again and again and again. And I think it's because there is something there, and it always would make me both smile and want to cry. And that's always been the work that speaks to me the most, because it's also, that is this sort of sense of how do we exist as humans in the world when the world is so dark so often, and how do we find the moments of lightness and joy and levity and connection. And yeah, that sort of duality of the light and the dark, of the shadow side and the sort of, yeah, the exalted side, it feels more and more prescient today, and political, and yeah, it's I guess that's on some level what With Love and a Major Organ is doing too. And I sort of hadn't, yeah, I hadn't really connected the two, actually. And when I rewatched Harold and Maude, I really did feel like there was a lot there about how do we live. It's a film about how do we live in this world, because this world is really, really hard to live in a lot of the time.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a film about coping. That was my revelation this time. It's about how people find ways through. And the really remarkable thing about Ruth Gordon's performance as Maud is that on the second viewing and the third and the fourth, it just gets richer and richer because Maud is on her way out. She's got this plan before she ever meets Harold. We have no idea how long this has been on her mind, but
Well, it's the setup at the beginning, right? It's so easy to miss on a first viewing. And she's like, I think 80 is a good time to go out, and we know it's going to be her 80th birthday. And then she springs it on Harold, and on the audience too, that she's taken some pills, and that she's choosing her time to go. And I guess, the irony, or the lovely sort of narrative construct being that he is quote unquote suicidal the whole way through, pretending to kill himself, but Maud actually does, even though she's the one who teaches him about living. She's like, go live more, love more, go love. Love is something that grows and grows and grows, and sort of that really, yeah, there's something so, even though it is not afraid to go to those dark places, it has this message of love.
yeah, and it's beautiful and weird. And I mean, this is always funny too, because now, in the rearview mirror, it's a classic, it's acclaimed, everyone knows about it, everyone discovers it at a certain time. It's a midnight movie for, rep cinemas in the 80s and 90s, and it never really goes away. It bombed. It was a massive failure, or perceived as such anyway, and not until the mid 80s did it really, I think, turn a profit, or at least recoup, and once it started to be a fixture in rep theaters. But the idea now that people could miss that message seems perverse. Like, the most perverse thing about the movie is that Hal Ashby made a film that was so messy and confrontational and honest that people rejected it out of hand in 1970. Like, the reviews were mean.
Yeah, I think a comedy about suicide actually is kind of ironic, because I'm sort of writing something in the similar vein actually at the moment. But yeah, a comedy about suicide feels like a paradox, but actually it's a very because our lives and your individual life is connected to our communal life and community. And I think it's about despair and individual despair, but individual despair doesn't exist on its own. It exists in connection with the despair that we feel in the world. So, and I think it really is trying to deal with some of these really knotty questions of, like, how do we exist as individuals? How do we exist in community? How do we exist in resistance? How do we find personal love? How do we? It's so, yeah, and it doesn't have any. It doesn't end with any kind of didactic. It's not didactic in that way. It's and I think, yeah, you're saying it's this kind of messiness. It's pure, but it isn't. it can't answer those questions because there is no one answer.
Yeah. Well, the key to me is that Harold is shown to be alone, working alone, fiddling around, doing whatever he does, but he's never really alone. He's always got someone nearby. He just doesn't talk to them. He doesn't connect with them. And that's either depression or his decision to remove himself from this stuff in the way that he expects, or that he plays with removing himself from the world. And the fetishism of suicide reenactments, I guess it's not a reenactment, but it's the staging your own death over and over again, is very silly, and also a cry for help every single time. Like the sadness that Harold carries with him is something that I didn't see until I was older, which really worries me in a lot of ways about who I was in my 20s and 30s.
I mean, he's so young as well. I think that's he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, all the absurdity or pointlessness. He also comes from such a privileged background. And yeah, I think Hal Ashby did a lot of interesting work thinking about class in and money in the period he was making work. And there's the sense that Harold doesn't really know why he's living. If he's got all this privilege, he's got this big house, but he's alone, and he's supposed to get married. There's that amazing scene where his mother's answering the kind of dating questionnaires for him, and she's like, oh yes, women should do that. Oh yes, no, I think we should say this, and she's sort of like answering it for him, and he's just sort of sitting there, like points a gun at his own mother and then points at himself and reenacts another suicide. And it's just I think the complete and utter pointlessness of the individualist crusade of a kind of capitalist society is it's so heavily political in that way. It's like, actually, how do we make this better? How do we engage? How do we sort of step out of these binary narratives
and be happy, or at least exist?
And be happy. Yeah, and I guess that's the thing. The film isn't really about mindless pursuit of individualistic happiness. It's commingled with many more layers of complexity, I think it's a masterpiece. I always love it.
It does feel that way. I mean, the more often I revisit it, the more I have time to think about. That's what I was trying to say. The more I have time to think about what it all means and where the pieces are. The math is a fun thing too. Not fun, but realizing that, this movie was made 25 years after the end of the Second World War, and Maude is a Holocaust survivor. It's another throwaway thing that just colors in that character and gives you a sense of maybe the desperation behind Maude's eyes when she's being really, really frantic and manic. She was in her 50s in the camps, which is something, now we're 50 years on from Harold and Maude, almost 55. And we're at a place where our brains are thinking, well, only children, right? That's the only people who were left. If you were a kid, maybe you've survived that because that's how old you'd have to be. But this is someone who was an adult person, a fully formed middle-aged woman in the camps. And she references living in Vienna briefly and doesn't explain anything further. And then the more time passes in the film, the more you have to think about why she is who she is and why she's made the choices she's made. And then I thought about how audiences in 1970 would react to something like that, where it's still relatively fresh, right? Nazis are still the villains in a lot of movies. They're making films about World War II, but they're making films about escape. Like Boys from Brazil isn't too far away from this, where the legacy of fascism is there. And then that's where, again, how political the film is. It seems to be mirroring back the American military experiment in Vietnam and the fact that there's another occupying, like Harold is part of the other side. He's part of the occupying force in this case and doesn't want to be. And maybe that's why Maude is drawn to him. Maybe that's why he's drawn to Maude, but he doesn't understand why, because he doesn't know this stuff. He doesn't see the tattoo until days into their relation, almost like 2/3 of the way through the film. And it's not commented upon, but it's 1970. He would know what that means. Now, apparently, there are characters with tattoos in films where the audience doesn't understand what that's for. And that's well, I mean, as somebody who grew up Jewish in the 70s and 80s, that's horrifying to me that people wouldn't know what that means instantly. But it speaks to a specific use of that of the military past of America and the future and everything else and the confusion of Vietnam. It feels this was the first time the movie felt angry to me, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I think it's a very, very angry film and a very critical film of the American war machine, which continues to rumble on today.
Mm.
And I think the ideas of occupation and trauma markers. And yeah, I think it's amazing to be able to make a film that is political without well, it is overtly political, I think, but without sort of yeah, I think it's hard to say that it isn't actually. It is overtly political, but it isn't presented as such or presenting as such. And I think that also speaks to Hal Ashby and the sort of how committed he was to sort of to his sort of political engagement in the world as well, and not just sort of making films in a vacuum and in a void.
Yeah, and I love his whole. I mean, his cameo in the funfair sequence, where he's just this disheveled human staring at a train set, just seems to be like the ultimate statement. He chose to be, the dirtiest, shabbiest looking person in the movie. I mean, that is how he looked. He didn't, I mean, the clothes are probably a little bit different, but he was an unkempt man. And I love that the film is that expression of himself too, that he's the rest of the movie is very composed. The worlds are very clean. Wes Anderson clearly ate every frame of this movie as a child and grew up. And the thing that I find fascinating about Anderson's films is that they are almost entirely a response to Harold and Maude's unstructured nature, because he just wants to put everything in order.
So it feels like Rushmore maybe comes more from that chaotic. There's more of that chaotic energy that sort of is in, but Harold and Maude still has that kind of. If you think about how it opens with that, it's so much visual storytelling with music and tableaus and it not just relying on dialogue, which is I think a lot of how Wes Anderson's work visually sort of works, I guess. And so there is this kind of mixture of order and chaos, which is actually, I guess, sort of so much of what filmmaking is you plan and you plan and you plan, and then you kind of also have to let it go and let it happen on the day as well, and trust your collaborators and trust the process too. So there's that double balance.
Yeah. And in Anderson's films, the worlds are orchestrated because the characters are trying to outrun whatever emotion is coming for them. And in Harold and Maude, everything is on the verge of falling apart all the time. Like all of these structures, the patrician house and the he doesn't like the cars that he gets and he destroys them or he refinishes them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he turns a Jaguar into a hearse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And somehow I just assume that the torch also blackens it, that he didn't paint it, he just burned the metal. I have no idea why I made that leap, but it feels like something Harold would do.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but the sense too of nothing being able to, like, structures that can't sustain themselves, and that this is the end times, that every time Maude gets in a car, she is trying actively to kill both herself, her passengers, and anyone else she might run into, but she never hurts a soul, which I find fascinating. Like, she's so completely reckless and yet nothing bad happens.
Yeah, well, I think, she does not trying to kill people. I guess she's just like, well, what are you going to do? Like, this life is so short and so nonsensical in so many ways that that it doesn't matter if I nick someone's car or I sort of take the policeman's bike or take the tree and replant it or whatever it is, because none of it really belongs to any of us anyway. So I guess it's a very it sort of speaks to sort of a more communal way of living and imagining the world. But yeah,
Even with the tree, I mean, she's trying to keep it alive. She's doing the best thing for it.
Yeah, what she believes is the best thing for it, and she follows that. She follows goodness, I guess. She doesn't want the darkness to swallow her up. She follows a kind of her instinct, and her instinct is one that is of goodness. At one point she says, try to aim above morality to Harold. And I just think is a really interesting way to think about it. Is what is moral high ground? But yeah, how do you aim? That's a very complicated idea as well. That is a very complicated idea.
Do the best thing, be your best self, even if other people make faces at you. That's not it either, though, is it?
Right, that's not it either. No, I think it's like, how do we continue to exist against all odds on this planet, on this rock spinning in outer space? How do we both accept that our tininess in the vastness of the universe, but also how individually we we do make a difference, and we should be making a difference. So yeah, it really deals with quite vast ideas.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to bring you up to speed on Shiny Things, my newsletter about physical media, culture, and the Odd Streaming Project. Last week, I spent about 3,000 words on James Cameron's very personal restorations of Aliens in the Abyss, and there's even more coming up this weekend. Sign up for a 14-day free trial at shiny-things.ghost.io, or find a link at the Semcast Blue Sky account. You like reading about movies? I like writing about them. Come check it out. I was thinking this time through as well, like the car stuff keeps coming back to me, and maybe what she's trying to do, even if she just whacks somebody else with a car, at least they'll know she was there. Like, is that it? Is she just trying to be present in the most physical way?
I don't know. I think I don't know. I think she just, especially because it's kind of her last few weeks on Earth in her perspective. So, and then not in a nihilistic way, she's not. It's not. I don't care about anyone. I'm going to do whatever I want. I think it's almost like a conceit of the film, I guess, on some level, or a stylistic choice that she's not going to hurt anyone as she moves through space and time. That's why it's such a complex film, because the stakes, even though Harold keeps pretending to kill himself, the stakes of mortality are not there. We know he's not really doing it yet, and nor did his mother, but all the women that his mother brings in for him to sort of maybe court are terrified by what's going on. But then the stakes become very real when she kills herself. So there's something about the world of the film as well, that it isn't quite the real world. All the stakes that have been set up are somehow outside of the realm of realism. And so I think there's something quite cinematically interesting in that conceit as well.
Yeah, and I think that brings us back to the Yusuf soundtrack, which tells us on some level, because every single one of his songs is about how everything is going to be all right, even though we absolutely know it isn't. The fact that it ends the way it ends. There's an essay in the Criterion Collection written by Matt Zoller Seitz, who says that last sequence is a vibe. Like, the car crash is one thing, but then seeing Harold in completely different clothes, brighter, happier than he's ever been, dancing off into this fuzzy distance shot through a telephoto lens, so he looks even softer and less real. Playing the banjo. There is no explanation for that makes sense, except that it's the right thing for the movie to go out on. And that's the joy of it, the serenity of it. Harold is going to be okay, finally. But it took all of this to get there.
I rewatching it this time, I did wonder whether there was ever any conversation about the ending and where it would end, or whether he sort of throws himself off the cliff, or whether it was always going to be him walking off into the distance with a banjo. I guess it's also, where do you leave an audience at what point? Because the story's not over, but this bit of the story is over, and yeah, I guess it giving Harold his next chapter, a new lease on life, I guess. He gets rid of the hearse, actually, on some level. He sort of defies, or not even defies death, because that's not the right word, but he decides to live. And that's what Ruth Gordon's character, that's what Maude says. She says, go love more, live more. It's almost like he's going to carry her spirit, her energy on.
Yeah, no, there's something beautiful to that. Colin Higgins, who wrote the screenplay, did say he wanted to do a sequel. He wanted to do Harold's story. It was in the late 70s, and people were talking to him. I think it must have been when Silver Streak came out, and he had this whole shared universe thing where there was going to be a sequel for Harold, but also a prequel where Ruth learns to steal cars with Richard Pryor's character from Silver Streak, which makes no sense.
I love that.
But I want to see it.
I would 100% watch that. Yeah, that should be our next universe, and sort of Marvel universe equivalent, the Harold and Maude universe.
Yeah, the Hal Ashby cinematic universe. Or the Colin Higgins one. They could run into the characters from 9 to 5. And Higgins is such a fascinating story, too. He was an Australian emigre who came to the States, landed in California, wrote Harold and Maude as his master's thesis at film school, and somehow got it made all these connections. He
was working for a producer and was like taking the producer's kid to school, I think, and was telling her the story of the film. And
got hired as an assistant.
Yeah, exactly.
The documentary is fascinating. He was openly gay. He threw fantastic parties, which is the thing that keeps coming back for the entire documentary, that everybody had so much fun with him. He worked on a French translation of Harold and Maude, which became a stage play, making movies, writing and directing, and then unfortunately died of an HIV-related illness in 1988, he was 47. His career was starting, and he spent the last few years just unable to work, and it's just this incredible, bizarre, creative life that burned really brightly and then went out. So I keep trying to equate it to the way Maude sees life, but I can't. You see his vivacity in her, that energy, that seems to be him writing himself as an older person. But at the same time, he would have been Harold's age when he wrote the script. So he's just this weird prism of possibility and potential, and like both philosophies seem entirely appropriate, but it's just so sad that he's not around to keep talking about it.
Yeah, but I kind of feel like the film exists in its own world, and sometimes we can theorize and talk about, but actually, like, I've been thinking a lot of recently about why we do any of this and all this making work and making independent films and sort of trying to figure it all out. But I think it's about the present moment, and it's about community, and it's about sharing the work, and it's about sharing that with people that you don't know, people that you know, and creating a kind of energy, because there is no such thing as posterity, really. There is no such thing as forever, and we only really have this moment that we get, and sort of there's been a lot of death in my life in the last year, and I think I've been reflecting a lot on how do you continue onwards whilst grieving and all those things, but it's actually it's about sort of how we connect now, and none of this is going to exist in the future anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But that's what it matters entirely, right? It's the everything and nothing. It's the horseshoe of history. It's how we have to hold these two ideas in both our hands and try and weigh them and try and find a way to care, because we have to care about where we are and what we're doing right now, and the people that live now, and all of those things that make us human.
It's the Joss Whedon line, as canceled as he's been lately. It's still a great piece of writing. If nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do. And that's the closest I have to a philosophy. And yeah, you don't want to be the worst part of anybody's day. You don't want to be an asshole unnecessarily. I mean, there's times when you have to be hard on people, but you don't have to be cruel about it. And then the thing that I keep coming back to for me about art is that it's the only thing that sustains me. That, besides a really good sandwich, I that's why I do this. I want to know what people think. I want to know what people feel, and I want to put it out into the world, because otherwise it's just, I'm hoarding it, and that doesn't seem fair. But we're coming up on the 500th episode of the podcast, and I've been thinking about whether I should keep doing it. I'm busier these days. There's, it used to be an excuse to conduct long form interviews with people that I wouldn't otherwise get to talk to, but it's just become the thing that sustains me more than anything else. This is an incredibly selfish project where I just want to know what people like and listen, and then I talk over them.
Yeah, it's always a funny thing, isn't it, to sort of just talk about the world with someone nowadays over Zoom and sort of, yeah, there's so many layers that so many ways to get to know people, and it seems like a nicer way as any.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. And it's not as though, sorry, before this totally becomes my therapy session, it's not as though your work doesn't also come right up against this. I mean, the key to me of your short film, Your Mother and I, is the way the penny gets to drop as we understand what's really happening in a way that the characters don't quite cotton on to, or that can't express to each other. And it's, what is it, 18 minutes long? And it's just this perfect encapsulation of that feeling. I remember sitting through it and thinking, oh, you've done it. Like, this is how this is supposed to go. And it was so moving. And of course, you've got Don McKellar and Julia Sarah Stone, who are two of the most talented thrower-awayers of emotion as actors. I remember just being struck by that. And what was that, like 2016, 15?
Yeah, and it was based on the short story by Dave Eggers as well. So yeah, I guess it's sort of, I'm always interested in work that sort of straddles the very personal and then the sort of wider political, because we exist in those spaces, and it's how do we sort of exist in our own interpersonal lived lives, and the hurts and the triumphs and the loves and the losses that we experience individually and then in our small communities, and how does that sort of translate into the wider space and a sort of more, I guess, geopolitical perspective and universal conceptual philosophical spaces. And I really don't know the answer to any of that, actually. And so I guess that's just something I'm trying to muddle through personally. And I guess a lot of my work reflects that struggle that I haven't reached conclusions about yet. And I feel like Dave Eggers' work does that too. I mean, it's the story of a father talking about how he and his wife changed the world, but nonetheless, it's from a very, very specifically privileged position. He's talking about all these quote unquote far-flung places from his nice middle-class kitchen, and I think there is an inherent tension there, remaking the world in whose image, and that's sort of something that I feel is, for me, was always a very important part of the story, an important part of what I wanted to bring to the screen there, as well as the father-daughter relationship and that personal connection that these two characters are struggling with, but the maybe or maybe not loss of the mother character, and yeah, all these kinds of things that we leave unanswered, because actually life is so I don't know, and I don't know anything. I mean, the older I get, the less I know. I mean, I feel like that's such a cliche, but it really is the case.
Yeah, and that's fine. That's what the art is for, I think. Like, that's what we're all just working through it in our own way.
And I guess that speaks, yeah, I come back to it's talking about the art. It just exists, and people can take from it. People will take from it what they want to take from it, and you'll have a certain intention in making it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's how it's going to be read or received, and it's a constant, I guess, a back and forth, and we're in constant dialogue with with your audience, and this idea of audience sort of, it can be such a it has, I think, become in many ways a selling tool, but actually really audience is just me talking to you and saying, hey, this is something that I'm thinking about. Do you want to think about it too? Does it connect? Are you interested? Is there something there? Or does it do something for you? I don't know. Like we're just constantly trying to be in communication.
Yeah. Which weirdly enough was the thing I keep waiting for in Harold and Maude. There is no one scene where you're seeing, like the two sides of this argument that you don't know you're watching.
You know what? That really struck me this time I rewatched it. And I don't, maybe there's more, I'm not 100% sure, but there's a moment after he sets himself alight, which also makes me think about very political actions of self-immolation that we have seen recently as well. Mm-hmm. He looks to the camera. There's one moment in the film, I think, that he looks to the camera, and that it really struck. I hadn't realized or remembered it, and it really struck me. He looks at us and he's sort of challenging the audience, and that it was it was very, very powerful.
It's shocking. I think it's the closest, and I don't know, and I suppose the script is out there somewhere. I should probably look it up because I am now curious. Like, is that Ashby or is that Higgins? Like, whose idea was it? Because it's such a format breaker. For 1972, if you did that at the end of your film, and it was this weird satirical "we're all in this together" moment. And here it's just like, well, what would you do? Why are you letting me do this? And it's such a great unreadable expression too. Like, there's so much you could read into it. And the thing that I was waiting for was the moment where Maude dismisses Harold's depression, tries to tell him it doesn't happen. But, in any other film, there's be a moment where she says, I've lived a long life and this is just a phase for you. But she accepts it. She respects his state of mind.
Seriously.
Yeah, she joins in.
She takes his emotional reality seriously. And I think that is so it's so important because he feels heard and seen for the first time, because he literally is trying to kill himself and his mother literally just breezes past him. She doesn't see him.
Yeah. And no one does. I mean, no one listens anyway. They certainly the girls who come to visit the computer dates, they see him and they're horrified and they run away in increasingly comic fashions.
They see his mother's version. They see a cash cow first. I think there's this, I mean, it's written in such a way. There's this kind of like, oh, marry rich, which is well, we can get into the politics of that, but yeah, there is that is definitely there. It feels like in the film, and then they sort of see this very troubled individual. They don't really see him; they see a sort of something that is imposed upon him by a sort of society standards, and that's yeah, it feels like it's a kind of like doll within a Russian dolls,
Yeah, and it's part of the system that Harold doesn't want to be part of. The pressures on, there's no room at all for the film to talk about the societal pressures on women at the time in the States, like after the Summer of Love.
It does. Right? Yeah, I mean, even with Maud's character, right? I was just thinking about this. You think about so many older men with younger women who are sort of in their 80s and having children with women of childbearing age, and then in Harold and Maude, there's a moment when he says, "I'm going to be marrying this woman," and his mother is horrified, and he goes to the therapist and to the priest, and the priest is like, "Imagining you with that saggy buttocks," and
yes.
So profoundly misogynistic, and the sort of double standards of those things. So I think it is there. Even obviously, it doesn't sort of go. You can't do everything with one film, but it does touch on that, and it does touch on this idea of those sort of the period, the gender politics of the period, and so it can't do everything, but I think it really does lean into that.
Oh yeah, no, I mean that we spend our time with Harold, so we don't see the exterior function, but yeah, it's absolutely there. It's there's a 2-hour version of the film that maybe spends a little more time on it, but I think this one is more This approach is probably the only way Higgins ever thought to do it, because it's such a straight line.
Yeah, and not everyone knows everything, even of the film. So I think, he's speaking to not necessarily his own experience, but to sort of, he won't necessarily be able to do every single element of it. But I think it really does feel like a very humane film in so many ways, and I think that's an incredible accomplishment. I would love to be able to accomplish something like that one day.
I have every confidence. But to that end, the last question on the podcast is always the same, which is, what, if anything, of Harold and Maude have you lifted or stolen or borrowed or homaged in your own work? Is there something? Is there a piece of your performance in With Love in a Major Organ that, there's a certain wistfulness to the character, but
you know what? I hadn't ever connected the two until this podcast, but actually looking at the rewatching the film, it really struck me the sort of the complicity of the world of With Love in a Major Organ and the world of Harold and Maude, because it exists sort of slightly outside of reality, and both of the films are really about what do we do with our heart, and how do we live in the world as sensitive beings? Do we close off and die, kill ourselves, or do we engage and throw ourselves into the messiness and heartbreak and sorrow of life? And I think Harold walking off with a banjo and at the end of With Love in a Major Organ, Annabelle and George sort of both choosing to live. And it's not about loving each other, it's about loving life and themselves and the world, and I think that sort of message, there is something similar message. It's not didactic, but that taste or quality that we leave an audience with felt actually kind of akin on some level. So I found that quite a curious and fun confluence of events.
My thanks to Anna Maguire, who you can see starring opposite Hamza Haq in Kim Albright's With Love in a Major Organ in theaters across Canada as of today. Thanks also to Ingrid Hamilton and Kate Yorga. They know what they did. You can find Anna on Instagram at Anna C. Maguire, all one word, and you can find Harold and Maude in a very nice Blu-ray special edition in the Criterion Collection. It's also streaming on Paramount+, Showtime, and Canopy in the US, and available to rent or buy on various VOD services in the US and Canada. You can find me on Blue Sky at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the show is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 44 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it, or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps. It truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get the new booster when you can. I'll see you next week.